Hi, I'm Eric Lubau, and welcome to Beyond the Belt. This is a conversation with Paul Elliott, a black belt out of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, USA. Paul is a software engineer, BJJ coach and writer, backpacker, and photographer. I hope you enjoy our chat. Hey, Paul, thanks for being here.
Hey, glad to be on.
So tell me what it was like for you to get your black belt.
Uh, it was a lot of work. I mean, as a black belt is. Um, I was I was I trained from white belt to black belt in the same place, so that was kind of nice. I had the same people training me all the way through. Um, like when I started at 37, and my idea was I gotta be a black belt by the time I'm 50. So I was like super aggressive about training as much as I could, studying as much as I could, doing the jujitsu camps, competing, everything I could think of to try to improve that process. I I got my black belt before I was 50 for sure, but it was kind of funny when I actually got my black belt. I had been a brown belt for 3 years, and it was kind of like I'd already had people ask me, when are you getting your black belt? I'm like, it'll get there. We'll get it figured out. And when I was finally scheduled to get my black belt, I was like super, super sick. Like I had a big, some kind of chest congestion. I could barely breathe. And, we were kind of the old school murder, the black belt. If you're getting promoted, you got murdered. Like from blue belt all the way up, you got murdered if you were getting promoted. My kind of black belt test, I was just trying to survive the whole time. And, I had students that were like, all right, this is finally our chance. We can take them out now. Yeah, so I survived that process, did a few demonstration techniques, and it was really cool getting the black belt. It was like, that final goal of jujitsu. And and I think the thing that excited me most about getting it is it opened up doors. It made it so that I could do more of the things that I wanted to do. I could go out and teach, like at the Globetrotters camps and things like that. I been invited to other camps, and it opened things up. Uh, not just in the opportunities I got, but also was how people talk about how getting a black belt is like you're being set free. That's one of Chris Howder's things. And it really is that. At that point, I don't have anything left to prove. It's more about what can I what can I do with my jujitsu? And for me, teaching is a kind of like a core component of what I want out of jujitsu. And the black belt made it so that I could go around, I could teach more, I could explore more, and with nothing to prove. So it's like if I'm rolling with white belts, it's like if they do techniques correct, they get the tap. I'm I'm totally cool with that. If they're learning something and I'm learning something, I might have to put myself in a really bad situation, and maybe I fight out of it, maybe I don't. And it's just that kind of being free to explore jujitsu without any constraints or without any expectations or having to prove something. That's like that's really kind of what took my trigger, I think, the most with the black belt. It's not something that you necessarily. I mean, it is a goal, and you hear all these things that people talk about. Getting the black belt or even any of the belts. You hear people talk about what it's like to get it, and you don't really quite get it until you get it. You get that belt, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what this is like now.
What do you think about the gauntlet? Or I mean, it's not. I guess it's not really a gauntlet. The way you describe it's more like a Shark Tank. Like, what
Yeah, yeah.
do you like that? Do you think it was a good thing or rite of passage?
Um, in some ways, I'm indifferent. I mean, I know some schools that have like extremely formalized tests. Other places are just like you're going to get the belt when you get the belt, and it's just going to be this like random thing where you have to survive the process. Um, I don't. I'm pretty open to like any interpretation. And on one hand, I like that shark tanking and that you have to prove your jujitsu under duress, because jujitsu is a real thing. It's not like we're doing katas and showing forms and things like that. We're we're training to completely dominate somebody against their will. So being thrown into a shark tank like that at like any arbitrary time, I think is a good thing. I think it's a good thing for people to realize, hey, at any time, I mean that's jujitsu. At any time, I could be called upon to use my jujitsu, and I want to do it efficiently. I want to avoid having to. Uh, but when called upon, you should be able to perform at a level that's appropriate for your who you are as an individual. So like putting a 70-year-old through a shark tank is going to be very different than putting a 23-year-old through a shark tank. It has to be appropriate for that person. So in general, I'm in favor of it, but I don't have a problem with people that are like, look, you've already put in your time, you've already put in your hard work, you've done all the hard things. This is, getting promoted is just a formality, and we just hold it as a ceremony. It's like I'm okay with either way. It just depends on, the person who's giving the belt, how they want to be. In some ways, it's more about the person who's giving the belt than it is about the person receiving the belt.
That's fair. We were talking earlier that you feel like a jujitsu doesn't solve everything for you. Kind of like you're not that jujitsu solves everything kind of person. Like, what does that mean to you?
So you've got the people that jujitsu saved my life. It changed everything about me, and all that, which is cool. I don't have a problem with that. When I think about jujitsu and what it's done for me, yes, I've obtained a lot of benefit out of it. But that's just it. I've obtained a lot of benefit out of it. If you aren't getting benefit out of jujitsu, then why do it? I mean, why be potentially miserable about something? And that's not to say that you give up on it or you decide it just isn't for you. I mean, it just may be a season in your life. When people take breaks, it's like, yeah, I hope they come back. But if you're not enjoying jujitsu, then it's basically a cost benefit, right? You have certain costs that are associated with doing something hard. And if you enjoy the process, if you enjoy doing hard things and achieving the end results, cool. But if you're not enjoying it, maybe some other hobby is for you. I mean, I don't even really care what it is. If you get benefit out of doing Tai Chi, cool, awesome. If that's your gig, great. If you get more out of rock climbing or scuba diving or skydiving or what have you, all those whatever. Jiu-jitsu is something. The way that I've like to think about it is jiu-jitsu is something that should help you bring balance to your life. If you are finding that jiu-jitsu isn't bringing balance to your life, then you need to take it down a notch. For example, you get these people that are like, they get burned out on jiu-jitsu. They're doing like, 5 days a week. That's starting to take over their life, everything, because they see people get consumed by jiu-jitsu and like, man, I want that. They look like they're having so much fun, but then they try it and it's not working. And jiu-jitsu is not worth nuking your job, your relationships. I mean, there's a lot of things that are way more important than jiu-jitsu. And as much as I enjoy jiu-jitsu and as many opportunities as it's given me, if for some reason it started affecting me negatively, then I'd change what I do. And this has actually happened. When I was a brown belt, my main black belt that was teaching all the classes decided to leave. And he had been, wanting to leave for a while. And it wasn't like it was some surprise, but there wasn't anybody else to teach. And so he asked me if I was ready to just basically take over all the class. I'm like, yeah, sure. I was teaching fundamentals. I was doing my thing, but it was going to be up to me. So I started teaching everything. And that started causing issues because I would go to work. I would, go immediately to jujitsu after work because jujitsu was like, 50 minutes away. So I'd have to leave work, go down there, train for, 2, sometimes 3 hours, and then get home and, maybe my kids weren't awake, So I would see them all to school, and then that was the last time I'd see them. There was times where, I'd be working late, I'd get up late, wouldn't see them off school. So there could be times where it was like 4 days that I basically didn't see my kids at all. And that is going to take a toll. So, I had to cut back. I had to start training somebody else to teach one of my classes so I could have a break in the middle of that. And, while mentally and physically I could train that much, it was going to cause problems outside of jujitsu. And so it wasn't worth it. So I cut back. Um, or,
What's
like
like a good
another
barometer
example.
that you could offer for people like who, aren't getting too into it? And because yours feels kind of obvious, like, hey, I'm not seeing my kids. Not that I'm like trivializing how
Yeah,
easy
yeah.
a decision it was, but like, how would you recommend other people try to gauge that for themselves?
If there's like some internal conflict about it, you got to look at the things that you care about. So like if you have a spouse and they're getting annoyed by how much jujitsu training you're doing, you know, if jujitsu is more important than your spouse, you're probably taking jujitsu too seriously, right? So you having the people that you care about, or like your boss, if something is like you're getting behind on things because you're spending too much time looking at jujitsu videos when you shouldn't be, that's a problem. So anytime that you start seeing those negative effects, you have to decide, okay, is this an obstacle to adapt and overcome, or is this something that's not going to change and is going to negatively affect me over the long term? So the barometer is always going to come back to what's going on inside your own head for you personally, whether it's like you're overtraining and getting injuries, or you're just getting mentally burned out. You feel you're kind of like dreading going to jujitsu, which happens. That's all the stuff that's inside your own head. But then you got to look at the other things, the other things that are important to you. Family, uh, work. The things that really should matter more than just rolling around in funny uniforms.
It's funny because like what I teach a lot of. I don't teach that many classes, but I teach the morning classes, and I feel like the type of people that come to the morning classes are different than the type of people that come to the evening classes. And I very rarely see the people who are overdoing it at the 8 a.m. or like 9:30 classes. I feel like the people that I always see that are kind of overdoing it are the evening goers, or like the middle of the day
Yeah.
plus evening. And I think it's funny that there's like a certain type of people that sort of overdo it, and they stick to a schedule that allows them to overdo it in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid jujitsu before 10 a.m., so I wouldn't know.
That's funny because I try to avoid it after 10. I finished teaching about 10:30 in the morning is the latest class I teach, and everything else I'm done with my workouts before 11.
Okay.
So when you teach, like how much of the so let me back up a little bit. You write a lot, right? You have the simple BJJ. You send out a newsletter, which is an interesting thing for like a written thing for a physical
Yeah.
activity. Before we even get into that, how did you get into that? Like, what made you decide to start writing, 10, 12 years ago, a jujitsu newsletter or jujitsu blog?
Um, so when I started jujitsu, I knew that I was going to be uh, an instructor. I knew that was going to be the end goal, because that's just kind of how I do things. If I'm going to get very deeply into it, I know that I'm going to end up teaching. Because part of that is I enjoy the process of figuring things out. So in the case of when I got my purple belt, it was kind of like I was at the point where, okay, now I'm a beginner expert, and I'm going to record my classes and for my students so that they have a recording of the class, and I'll give a description, and I'll go into more depth than what I was able to do in class. And so it started out as kind of like a resource for my own students, but uh, it was also practice. I knew full well that starting writing as a purple belt, starting doing videos as a purple belt was not was not necessarily like I'm not necessarily going to get things right all the time. I'm going to have things that I look back at in the future, and I have some questions about what was done. But I also figured that was also the easiest. Well, it was the most efficient way to get better faster. Was put myself on the spot, and if somebody had a critique, I'd take the critique in the spirit given. If I did something wrong, okay, cool. I want to know about that when I'm a purple belt, not when I'm a black belt. So a lot of the doing the writing stemmed from doing the classes, but I was also trying to communicate to students like what I consider the deeper truths of jujitsu. And kind of like over time, I stopped doing the class videos and just focused mostly on writing, because as I was thinking about jujitsu and thinking about what are the core truths, what are the things that we're trying to communicate, a lot of the writing would stem out just conversations I was having with students, and I'd be it's like they could ask me a question, I could give them an answer, but then I get thinking about it. Okay, was that the best answer? Is there a better way to present this? And so I started writing kind of frequently at that point. Well, when I say frequently, I was trying to get like in maybe once a month, that kind of thing, or sometimes once a week. It just depended on what was going on in jujitsu as to how much I tended to write.
So did you use it as
So
a
then,
method of like processing? Like you are almost like processing what you learned in written form, as opposed to like maybe, I don't know, excessive drilling? I'm just juxtaposing it
no,
against
I
like
think,
an idea.
yeah, no. I think it was more a case of all of the writing that I did was I had something that I wanted to pin down the ins and outs of. I could give a competent short answer, but I wanted to really flesh it out. So writing helped me flesh things out in a way that, you know, like for example, what I could do is after the fact, somebody would ask me a question, I'd be like, okay, here's a short answer, but if you want to, get into this a little bit deeper, go to my website, look for this particular article, and that'll give you a more in-depth view. So that was like, I wanted to have something that was a resource in the future for, when people had particular questions that I've answered before.
Do you happen to know what your most popular post is, or like most frequented?
Yeah. Um, it's kind of funny, like over the years, it turns out that the thing that gets read the most is some articles I wrote about training with Henry Akins. Um, I don't know if there's like, I mean, I don't pay any attention to search engine optimization or anything like that. Everything that I put out there has just been like, this is just what I'm putting out there. I'm not trying to accomplish some like big grand goal with these things. It's going to be this thing that I'm writing it because that's what I want to do. So when I did a seminar with him in Costa Rica back in 2014, I think, or no, 2015, whatever it was. I think it was 2014. uh, partway through, I'm like, I need to write about this because the stuff that I'm learning is just amazing. That became a popular thing. And then after a year, I wrote another article, a year with Henry Akins, because I kept on using his stuff all the time. It was this thing where, because I used what I learned from him, like literally every single role. Um, it was something interesting to write about, and what my recollections and observations, and those two collectively have been like easily the most popular things that are read on my website. Um, there's some other ones that are like close seconds, but because I don't pay a lot of attention to it, I'm not sure what they are. It's just I know over time, if I look over long periods, those were definitely the most popular ones.
That's kind of surprising that it's like a random thing and not. I guess I feel like it's always the thing you put like not the least effort in, but it's kind of like just this throwaway thing, and then all of a sudden that's like the thing that people frequent the most. Or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, whatever floats people's boats. I mean, as long as my whenever I put something online, I want it to be one of two things, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, my own website. I want it to be one of two things. I want it to either be informative or humorous. If it's not that, then I'm not going to put it up there. And since the vast majority of my online life revolves around jujitsu, that's pretty much all anybody sees. So it's like if you follow me on Facebook, You don't see like random observations about, some political thing or some other, non-jujitsu thing. It's all going to be strictly about jujitsu. And so that's, as far as anybody can tell from an online presence, that's like literally all I do.
Yeah, that's fair. I know you do other stuff, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But before we do, I'm just curious, like you started jujitsu at 38, that's not like a young age to start damaging
No.
your body the way we tend to do in jujitsu. Like, what have you done differently over the years of, between training as a white belt at 38, 40 to being a black belt around 50 plus,
So when I started, like everybody in the school was like, I think at least 12 years younger than me. And most of them like, 14, 15 years younger than me. Man, that was brutal. That was really, really, really hard. Because I was still, reasonably athletic, reasonably strong. And at 37, I could keep up with them. I just didn't have quite the stamina. So I had to basically train a little bit smarter. I couldn't just assume that, okay, I'm just going to bull rush this and make things happen. I could do that for a brief amount of time, but I couldn't spend an hour training doing that. So, my when I started, the classes were an hour long, and then open mat was an hour long. And because I was driving at that time, it was like close to an hour to get there. Um, I was trying to maximize my time, and I didn't want to like leave early or anything like that. And I wanted to do as many classes as I physically could. So I had to do things like, okay, it turns out that training 3 days in a row hard is a really, really bad idea. It turns out that instead of my accustomed 6 hours of sleep at night, I gotta get 7 hours of sleep now, whether I like it or not. Um, so pacing things and taking recovery really seriously were like the biggest things for me early on. As as things got later, you know, as I got better at jujitsu, then I could pick my battles a little bit more. So like we had so many like young, strong guys coming. We were right next to Fort Drum, and 10th Mountain Division guys were coming in. And I mean, I literally had people come in that I would try to armbar and they would like curl me. I'm like, oh no, this is a problem. And where they would like basically pick me up and slam me, and it's like just a lot of high energy things happened with the guys that were typically coming in. So I had to be smarter about it. I had to, early on I had more overuse injuries, and I had to, spend more time in PT and you know, but that got old really quick. So I started, really just paying attention. Like anytime something fell off, I had to take it seriously immediately. The young guys, like these 19-year-old guys, they go to a competition, they get their elbow, they fight off like 10 arm bars in a row, and the final one, got cranked so bad that they're like nearly in tears, putting ice on their elbows. 3 days later, they're fine. I'm like, yeah, that must be nice.
That's one of the things that I think I struggle to get across to some of the younger folks in jujitsu is like, yeah, you might be fine now. You might be able to get away with popping an elbow and then getting right back at it, but that stuff takes a toll, and you need to
Yeah.
take it down a couple notches, because the rest of us don't heal like that, especially not as we get up into our 40s and
Yeah.
probably older.
I don't, yeah, I don't think that's really something that you can communicate to somebody. I think everybody has to go through it because they're like, well, it's working. It's like diets. You can engage in some really horrific dietary habits and get away with it for a while, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. And jujitsu is the same way. Our bodies are remarkably adaptable, and we can take advantage of that fact, but only for so long. So that's why being sensitive to what your body's doing and taking things seriously. Now you can take it too seriously. When I was like, I don't know, blue belt somewhere, I had a basically an overuse issue in my elbow. It was like a golfer's elbow or something. And I did the smart thing. I went into a sports physio or sports ortho to take a look at it, and he's like, okay, take a month off and we'll be fine. So I took that month off, That was awful. Yeah, I recovered, but not doing any jujitsu at all was just, it sucked. And I never took that much time off again. But what I did do was if I had anything that was like approaching overuse injury, I would back things off and take the PT seriously and make it so that I could still train. And that worked out really, really well until I was like a brown belt. I ended up with a bicep tendonitis issue that kept me out of competition. It kept me from like rolling as hard as I would have liked. And part of the problem was that it wasn't really properly diagnosed at this point. I'd gotten so used to recovering from different little, niggling issues that it wasn't a big deal to just be like, okay, I'm going to continue training because I can. And I spent like close to 2 years with what turned out to be bicep tendonitis. And as soon as I got it properly diagnosed, which took all of 30 seconds by somebody that knew what they were doing, then I went to my PT. I'm like, okay, this is what I've got. And he's like, oh, it's that? All right, well, let's fix that. And 6 weeks later, I was fine. So
That's infuriating to hear.
But
Misdiagnoses are tough.
Yeah. So that was it's a good lesson to take the little things seriously. You don't have to be paranoid about it. I mean, if you train smart, you can train through it. I mean, you look at the competitors out there, and they train through injuries all the time because that's their goals require it. They don't have any choice. If you're trying to be number one in the rankings or something like that, you have to go train and compete with whatever you got going on, whether you like it or not, because that goal is greater than the suffering that you have to put up with. And there's definitely something to be said for that. But if you're a hobbyist, don't pretend that you're like some hardcore I'm just going to train through everything. I'm going to lift more even though it hurts. It kind of stuff just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So as long as people are paying attention, yeah, you can work around just about anything. But it just like the overuse injuries, if you start overdoing it, you got to take it down a notch and take the recovery more seriously. While it's super tempting to roll hard, you just don't do it. Having that self-control is really tough. It's really tough.
It's one of those things that I think there's only one way to learn that lesson, and that's usually the hard way. Like you got to learn that self-control.
Yeah, so when I would get injured, well, just real quick, when I would get injured, like the small things where I'd have to take like a week off. I used to go into jujitsu and watch the classes. That was torture because like all I could think about was getting out there I can't do it. Because what happened was I'd be like, I can get away with it. And I would go out there and like it would start out with just like saying, hey, you should be doing this a little bit differently. And then before you know it, I'm doing full live rolls when all I intended to do was just go in and watch. So now if I'm injured enough that I shouldn't be doing jujitsu, I'm not there at all.
I don't know how people do it. I can't, if I'm so injured like that I can't do jujitsu, I can't go watch because I'm too tempted.
Yeah, I don't. I basically put jujitsu down for a little bit when that happens. It's like I don't even really necessarily watch videos or anything like that. It's just like, all right, I'm doing something else now.
And that's why I think it's important that people have other hobbies and other interests outside of jujitsu. Yeah. Otherwise, when you get injured, then you lose your identity in the fact that your injury has taken away your sole source of passion or sole source of escape or whatever you use it for.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
So you're like full-time, you're a software developer, right? Like you work in technology. You got into writing software similar to me in the late 80s, which is like a crazy early period of time to have started doing something that is so pervasive. What was it like for you watching, assembler develop into like the modern programming languages?
That's something I've been, just when I was thinking about, getting on here, I got thinking about my kind of history in computing. And it started in 64 on a, a TRS-80 color computer, 8-bit computer, that kind of thing. And in those days, if you had a 64K computer, it was like, this is pretty good. And you would have a memory map for it and actually know what was going on in the computer. You pretty much had a really good idea of what every location in the computer, what it was for, what the purpose was, how you could tweak it, and doing things like writing assembler code to get the most speed out of it. I mean, I was trying to make a like a Star Wars clone, and I had to use assembler in order to get the graphics to draw fast enough. And I was 14, 15, something like that. So I never was able to fully make the clone. I only found out just recently that the Star Wars games in the arcade actually used the same chip that I was programming on. So I was like, oh, turns out it was theoretically possible. It was fast enough. I just sucked.
It is disheartening as a programmer to realize what you could have been capable of and couldn't figure it out. I know that sentiment very well.
Yeah. So it was, going from those days of, writing super low level code to now the ecosystem is so vast that you can only hope to be good at what you're working on.
What was your first language?
You can't be good at everything. Basic.
You started at basic also? Yeah. So I
started with the manuals.
I started in basic and then I shifted over to, so first it was like the old DOS exec bat files. And then I got into a little bit of basic. In school, they had us doing something on Apple's called Logo Writer. For the few of us that were, that was like my real intro before I got into basic. And then I think I started with C and then got into assembler. It took me a little while to get to the assembler side of things. But you just dove right in the deep end.
Yeah. I dove into the deep end. Then, I progressed to Pascal.
I did that too in high school.
My very first, commercial piece of software was in Pascal. And then I went to college for the first software.
Yeah.
It was a thing to convert artistic files like AI and EPS files into DXF files that were suitable for machining. My brother had like CorelDRAW, and he had a CNC router, just like a desktop CNC router, and he wanted to do these artistic things on that router. But there wasn't an easy way to get from CorelDRAW into what the router software needed. And so I came home for Thanksgiving and we started basically just making something to do that purpose. And we ended up getting deeper into it and optimizing that process so it generated better files. And it was like, oh, this isn't just something that we could do. This is something that we could actually sell. And so I basically stopped going to college and we started selling that. But while I was in college, I audited a graduate level course for C++. And it was actually the Marshall Klein, the guy that maintains the C++ FAQ. He was the one teaching it. So I got my introduction to object-oriented programming from one of the best in the business, so to speak. And that class was actually more useful to me than anything else that I did in college. And when I left college, I basically put down the Pascal as soon as I could, started programming in C++, and did that until 2006, 2005, something like that, when I started doing C#. Man, it was like I could do all these amazing things in C++. It was an amazing language for letting you do whatever you wanted anytime you want, including, I was doing things like, putting in assembler code in it to, make the matrix multiplies faster. There was all these different things that you could do really, really well for low level stuff in C++, but also let me get in a lot of trouble. So like sometimes there was like these intractable bugs in my software that were just because there was so many layers of code and preprocessor directives and things going on that made the code look super elegant. But if anything went wrong at one of those levels, it was impossible to figure out. And then when I went to C sharp, it's like all that stuff went away because it kind of enforced a bit more simplicity, and it ended up being a better overall. It ended up being a better language for me for software engineering and making sure that things didn't get nutty. So
Well,
I've
one
been
of
C
the
sharp ever
issues with
since.
C++ going down that low level was C++ didn't let you get as specific with your memory management as C. And so if you did anything pre-processor inside of C++ that was C related and you got lower level, then C++ would try to do your memory management in a way that C was like, I've got this. And it's like they didn't behave in consistent ways. And I remember that because I ran into a lot of bugs writing C++ and trying to go a lower level than I should have, then having to jump back up and
Yeah.
clean up the
Well,
memory
it always,
management the way C++ liked it.
yeah, it always ended up being something for me where I had to have the right tools. Because there was always tools like, if you were optimizing, there was VTune to look at what the low level timings were. You had memory profilers that would, like I had this one, oh, I forget what it was called, but basically it instrumented the entire build and made it so that it would track all the allocations. And that was like
Was that
the
like
only decent
MPP
way.
Prof or something, or CPP Prof or something along those
No,
lines?
it was some commercial package. I can't remember what it was, but it worked out. It worked out really well for figuring out those kinds of issues. And yeah, they're all basically doing the same thing. You instrument the build, it keeps track of it separately, and then you get to a point where you're like, okay, everything should be okay, and it's like it is not in fact okay. And then you have to figure out, okay, what did I do wrong? What did I miss? And all those memory issues were always, oh man, they were always such a hassle to figure out. And that was, one of the reasons I went to C sharp is because I'm like, okay, well, you know, they say they've got this memory management thing figured out. Not really. I mean, to a large degree, it's figured out, but you still have to take it seriously. If you're doing anything beyond trivial projects, it's like my current code base is somewhere like, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 400 and 500,000 lines of C sharp code.
Ooh,
Um,
that's a lot.
yeah.
Even with modern day
So
IDEs, that's a lot.
yeah, it is. But that's what's accumulated over the last, well, getting close to 20 years of writing the C sharp code because we've been kind of like in the same industry. And so we've been, really kind of building out all the features in this one particular piece of software. The code that I originally wrote is all still being used. There hasn't really been, there's been like new generations of code, but all the low level stuff that I wrote back at the very beginning is still 100% in use. So it's a fairly large active code base that I'm the only one doing anything with it.
That's pretty awesome, though. I mean, like, one of the things that's been amazing to me is how LLMs in the last 6 months have gotten to the point where they can learn large chunks of your code base, make reasonable suggestions. I mean, they're not replacing junior developers or anything anytime soon, but they make like reasonable suggestions based on what your code's doing and what you're attempting to do. And they shortcut the workload of like senior or experienced developers pretty effectively. Like how, but they struggle. They're effective on greenfield, less effective on large existing code bases. Like how have you dealt with that on a large existing code base and still made use of like what LLMs offer?
Recently, I've actually been finding that the tools in the Visual Studio, where they've got the agent mode,
Yep.
um, that can work pretty good. One of the things that I found is that you have to give it some kind of grounding. So if I'm working with an existing code base, one of the first things I do is I tell the AI, okay, here's the files that are involved in this particular subset. Is there anything you're missing? So we make sure we've got everything that it wants. So like one of the places I like to do that is in Claude. I use their projects. I upload the files to it. Say, okay, do you understand the code base? Do you have any questions? Is there anything that you're not seeing? As I got, no, I got a pretty good feel for this. And I'm like, all right, let's create a design document for this. Because I never had time to generate design documents. and everything was just always evolving. So like if you made a design document, it was just getting obsolete immediately. But with AI, I could say, okay, let's create a design document. This shows me what your understanding of the architecture of the different pieces. And if anything doesn't make sense or it misinterprets, I can correct that design document. So we start with a bunch of code, a design document that says what my intention is. We get all of that on the same page. Then I can continue on and say, okay, now I want to create this. And even in the greenfield stuff, getting that design document together is, for me, it's been really, really important. And it's kind of funny because classical software engineering says, you need to have some specs to go by. You need to make these decisions about what you're doing, or if you're making specs for somebody to build it, like you're contracting out to a third party. It's like you got to have good specs. So giving these LLMs these good specs makes a huge difference. So
For
getting
context,
getting everything.
are you the only one writing the code on this application,
Yeah.
or do you work with like a team?
Nope, just me.
So you have
Yeah,
it.
small business.
No judgment. I'm just, this is like really interesting to me because I manage large teams of engineers and so, and product managers. So I get to, say, hey, do the design doc, do the product spec. All right, engineers jump in and do it. Do you store the design docs like alongside the code, or and then tell it, hey, like, here's the design doc, go deliver on this. And then do you have it like right back to the design doc, some of the changes that it made so that it can that's a really good idea.
No, it makes a huge difference.
So just because I want to repeat this back to you to make sure I understand it, your workflow is, here's the code, here's the files that I think you will need, here's my goal, write the design doc. You read the design doc, it outputs, and you say, okay, now go ahead, create an agent to make those changes. And then I assume probably write the tests on the backside to make sure that these are the outputs that you get from it.
Yeah, exactly. So,
That's
it's
really smart.
it's great for it does a really good job because I can say, okay, I need a test for this part of the design doc. So like if I have existing code that doesn't have tests against it, it does a real good job of writing the test. And then, you've got this iterative development of the design document is being built at the same time as the code. And then anytime I smell something weird going on, it generates code that I look at and it's like, that seems a little bit fishy. Okay, let's take a step back. Let's look at the design document. Let's figure out if I have a logical flaw in what I'm doing. Because sometimes, the design document is wrong. My interpretation of how things should be architected is wrong. So by looking for those things that smell a little bit fishy, I can go back and say, okay, let's get back to our first principles here. Let's get our baseline and get all this ironed out and work through the logic. And then only once me and the AI are on the same page as to what the code is currently doing and what the design document says, then we can make incremental changes. And AIs are really good at making incremental changes. If you just hand it something, like this was it zero shot coding stuff, where you basically say, hey, this is what I want, and it tries to make the entire thing. It's like,
those never go
for
well.
trivial things. Yeah, I mean, for trivial things, it's fine. But where AI really shines is if you look at the LLM models, it's basically just a really good prediction engine. So if you give it a good starting point and ask it to extend it just a little bit, it does a pretty good job of predicting what the code needs to be, what the design document needs to be. And it's getting better all the time. Absolutely. But you still have to use the tools intelligently. And, over the last, from when I first started using AI for generating code to now, the code quality has gotten enormously better.
Yeah, agreed.
But it's still, you still have to be a domain expert. You still have to be able to interpret what's going on.
Do you start with baseline rules? Do you have like a rules doc inside your repo and say, hey, here's my coding standards, here's the standard ways I want you to write specs and tests and whatever? Or do you just go straight for the design doc and let it work from context?
Yeah, I try to keep it focused on what we're conceptually looking at. I'm not trying to give it like, oh, here's how to do absolutely everything. Because the other part of that is going to give me something that's closer to best practices, which being a, solo developer that, was mostly self-taught, while I take standard practices pretty seriously, I'm not really exposed to them all that much. And just like with jujitsu, I research, I look at, what other people are doing, and like all the pair programming and agile development, and all these different ways of looking at developing software. I took all those things seriously, but if you're a solo developer and there's like nobody above you to enforce these things, and sometimes you just don't have time to enforce them on yourself, I tend to there's a lot of times where I say, okay, this is what I'm doing. Does this look like best practices to you? Like, working on an MVVM pattern, maybe my model isn't quite as strictly constructed as it should be. And a lot of times the AI is perfectly willing to say, well, you've got some, user interface dispatcher code in the model. It's completely okay with it, unless you say, is this really best practice? Because the problem I'm running into smells like this is a bad idea. And it'll be like, oh yeah, it's a bad idea. And it's like, you could have
This
let
is
me
what
know
I
that
meant
earlier.
about this is what I meant about rules, right? Like if you're writing, like model view controller and you say, hey, I want to keep business logic out of the controller, like that would be a standard rule that the AI could then follow if you just have like
The
your
thing is
rules doc.
but there's so much of that already out there. I mean, the kind of the way that I look at it is these things that are standard. Once you identify what the pattern is, the, call it the weight of what it was trained on, what ought to be correct, or at least, really, really common. So I don't really worry about these kind of like big, huge rules. I'm looking at it more in terms of I wanted to accelerate whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm starting with. And the more stuff that I add on as, okay, here's more baseline, here's more rules, here's more, how I want things to be done, it kind of clouds what the AI is doing when it comes to solving one particular incremental problem. So I prefer to have it be less constrained on things that aren't necessarily relevant to the immediate problem. Now, if I'm trying to debug something that's, in the MVVM pattern, and, I might say, okay, let's look at the code base. Everything's clearly labeled. Am I doing anything that goes against best practices? And so I don't have to have a document that says what best practices are. I just say, hey, does this follow best practices as far as you can tell? Do you see anything smelly? And most of the time, if you look at it in those terms, it does a good job of saying, oh yeah, this might look a little bit suspicious. So I tend to stay very focused on the specific task that I'm trying to do, and try not to hand it too much.
Do you worry about technical debt a lot? Because that's a thing that I see a lot of with like the AI code is that it will create LLM based code is that it creates a lot of, I don't want to say garbage, but it's extraneous because it's trying to like be a little bit more verbose. So do you feel like it gives you a lot of technical debt, or do you feel like it's just not a thing that you're as worried about as a sort of solo developer?
I go through my commits pretty much line by line. So like if AI was involved in it, before I commit, I make sure that there's nothing that looks nutty. And sometimes stuff does get through. I mean, I just had something I was working on this weekend where I had some SQL queries, and because this was a project that's been going on for a while and I've been using AI on it extensively, it ended up misinterpreting some things, and I ended up with like two virtually identical SQL statements in two different functions, but they weren't completely identical. But the AI hadn't picked up on it. It hadn't looked for that opportunity to optimize what was going on, or even question why there was these things. It just accepted it as is. So I had to go back and say, okay, I had to do normal software engineering. Okay, what are we trying to accomplish? What are the which one of these is correct? Can I consolidate them down into one function? Did I or the AI misinterpret the problem that ended up with this what ended up being like that technical debt where we've got something that shouldn't even be in there that it put in there. AI is a great accelerator, but it doesn't replace the domain experts. So you still have to pay attention to what it's outputting. It's just like if you had a junior engineer that you sent off to do a project and they come back with a code, the smart thing to do is to look through that code and make sure that they didn't introduce anything that's going to be a nightmare later, right? So AI in that way can be a little bit like that junior engineer that you just have to kind of keep an eye on and make sure it doesn't do anything stupid. If it passed the test, if it gets the job done, probably good enough to check in. But if you want to avoid problems later, it's best to just double check everything.
I think that's a totally reasonable way of looking at it. It's also something for me that's interesting is that with junior engineers, you can sort of expect to some extent that they're going to learn. Like, hey, here's something I'm going to show you. You're going to do it differently. Well, the AIs, like, hopefully they learn, but they're not retaining often what you tell them. They might make the same mistake, on repeat. And that's one of the reasons I was asking about rule sets, because I find that rule sets often are a slim negotiation around what you consider to be things that are important to you in its operating model. Like the way you particularly like to write tests, or, if you do test-driven development, or if you like dry code, or if you have a specific model view pattern that you like, or a logic sense for what goes in the view, what goes in the controller, what goes in the model, what goes in just the different parts and libraries, services, etc. And so I just think it's interesting that as an individual person, you're not relying on that more heavily. And it's interesting to me to hear that the way you structure things is more output driven than safety driven, and you still rely on yourself for the safety. It's not a judgment. It's just observational, talking to engineers kind of over the last few weeks about how they use it.
Yeah.
It's something I see a lot.
I kind of wonder if it is just more, because I have to be so intimately familiar with everything that's in the code. If I was working in a bigger team, I can see where that would potentially make a bigger difference to make sure that you have some of those baseline rules in place. So it could just be, how many minds are involved in it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I might experiment with that, try to give it a little bit more of that, this is how I expect things to be done, more, call it corporate standards, so to speak. Is that kind of like what you're talking about as far as what you put into that kind of thing?
Yeah, but it's very loose. In the same way you might have a readme.md file at the top of your, a markdown at the top of your repo, you might have LLM rules for testing, and you're like, hey, include this when you're writing tests, or include this when you're writing to the model, right? And you ask it to check for best practices, or if you're asking it to, include this file when you're writing SQL, so it can say, hey, check all the SQL files and make sure there's nothing that looks similar to this, and and you can be smarter about reusing existing things. Just stuff that does the legwork that you're doing, not so that you stop doing it, but so that it at least thinks about it and you're not having to run through your mental models checklist repeatedly on every commit.
You know what? It could just be something that, when I first started using these AI models, they had such small context windows, and they started, hallucinating so fast that it wasn't worth doing. It may be now that, they have these much larger capabilities. I should probably investigate that and play around with that a bit more, because it's probably less likely to cause me problems than it was, say, a couple of years ago.
I would suggest that those rules are very helpful when you have standard patterns that you tend to apply to your to your code, to your style, to your libraries, whatever kind of model you use on a regular basis. I also wanted to talk to you about backpacking, because you're a solo developer and you also do remote backpack. How did you get it? It sounds like you do a lot of stuff by yourself, by the way.
I like figuring. I'm very much I call it a high functioning introvert. I am super happy by myself, and I like figuring things out and optimizing things, but I also, it's I don't have any problem having a deep conversation with somebody as well. And it's not like this, terrifying thing to me to interact with people. So but I do enjoy doing things, more or less by myself or with like very few other people. So like the backpacking, when I was a kid, I'd go up into the Adirondack Mountains with a group of teenagers and adults, and we go up there and hike all over the place, and that was always really cool. I enjoyed that, getting out in nature, eating really horrible food, uh, but it was cool. It was a lot of fun. And then I didn't do much backpacking after college. Um, but then my college roommate, he moved to Alaska, and he'd been trying to get me for years to come up to Alaska, but it was funny. I didn't have the money to do these big Alaska trips. Um, so when I finally did have a bit more, disposable income to work with, I started going up there, and it was always about going out into the wilderness. And it really appealed to me to go out there in places where there was no support. There weren't any trails. You could basically put your tent wherever was going to work. You had to pay attention to the bears. All these things that was appealing to me, for whatever reason. And so my secondary goal was always to do photography. Always, I always liked doing photography, and I looked at, going out into these remote areas and capturing the landscapes or the foliage or, the animals, all that kind of stuff, the stuff that was hard to get, the stuff that, not many other people did. And like jujitsu, do the hard things. And it was just me and my, college buddy that we went out and did all these trips out into the Arctic, Prince William Sound, Lost Coast of Alaska. I don't know how many times I've been up there now, but it was, I have never felt more relaxed than in the middle of the Alaskan Arctic, where there was nobody else for, you know, 50 miles, like literally nobody else for 50 miles. And to be able to just sit there and be just almost effectively completely alone. My backpacking buddy with me, but, somebody that I've known forever. But I could just sit there and relax and just there's no concerns. The only concern I have is, am I going to eat the freeze-dried fruit, or am I going to have a granola bar? That's my biggest decision in the next 5 minutes. So everything else gets emptied out, and all you have is this beautiful scenery around you. You're pulling out the binoculars, looking for sheep on a far hill, or maybe hear some wolves, paying attention to whether there's any bears around you. So it's like everything is so fundamental and raw. And all of my backpacking was focused around kind of like optimizing that experience. I would spend hours in Google Earth looking for an interesting mountaintop that would give me just a really cool picture. Or, studying caribou migration and figuring out, okay, if we go down this river at this time of year, where are the chances that we're going to run into a big caribou herd? What are our backup plans? Um, we had a trip that we went down the Conga Cut. It was me, my buddy, and his wife. We were doing a float trip, and we encountered a bunch of caribou, but we got up to where the takeout point was, and decided that we were just going to hike up to the Arctic Ocean. It was like from there, it was like 25 miles, something like that, one way. So we had to, hike, camp, get to the coast, and we had enough days to do it. But in that, it was cool to just like, okay, we're going to hike to the Arctic Ocean, over the next couple of days, and take a dip in the ridiculously cold water that still has ice all over the place. It's like these kinds of things that just people don't normally get to do, and there's nobody else around to. For me, there was nobody else around to spoil it. There was just the close friends, and there weren't like these masses of other people that, like you go to Hawaii, you can't do anything in Hawaii without lots of other people around. And it's beautiful and it's a great experience, but there's still lots of other people around. And, I guess that's like the one thing that puts me a little bit on edge is when there's a ton of people around doing something that I would much rather do by myself. Um, I go to a museum. If I could like rent out a museum and just go in there and enjoy it, I would be so happy because I wouldn't be dealing with, jostling with other people to see things, so
That's
backpacking
like
is kind
going
of like
to
that.
a museum on a weekday. Usually a
Yeah.
little bit less crowded than on weekends.
Yeah. But it's like I don't even like going into cities all that much. I've gotten better over the years, but it used to be like I would just start driving into a city and it would like put me on edge because it's like, oh, there's gonna be so many people that I have to deal with that are, got their own agenda. They're going to cause me issues, frustration, and that's what I intended to focus on. Over time, it got more like, okay, yeah, I don't like being around this many people, but there's benefits to be had too.
You told me you built a bunch of your own gear as a result of all these trips. Like what kind of gear did you build, and what was wrong with the stuff that you had that you felt the need to kind of DIY it?
So one of my like baseline assumptions is that I can do pretty much anything. So when when the first backpacking trip I did up there, I had my DSLR. I had like three different lenses with me, and that added a lot of weight. And I didn't want to suffer while trying to enjoy the wilderness. So I started like trying to, okay, I'm setting up spreadsheets for figuring out what my macros are for my meals. I'm trying to minimize the weight on all of that stuff. And the tent was like this uncomfortable amount of weight. I'm like, you know what? It, I looked at like what these ultralight guys are doing, which they do insane stuff. The ultralight backpackers, they are willing to put up with a lot of misery. I am not. Uh, I want to optimize what I'm doing and be comfortable. I always refer to it as comfortably light. I don't want to be ultralight. I want to be comfortably light. And in order to achieve that goal, I looked at like some of the tents that were being built. There was this material, Cuban fiber. It was called at times called something else now. Um, but people were using it to make, ultra lightweight tents. They were making all kinds of gear with it, and it was sailcloth, like for like these America Cup racers. It was the same technology. Basically, had two layers of mylar and then Dyneema in the middle of it. So you have this material that the cords inside don't stretch at all. It's totally waterproof, and it's super super light for what it is. And so I thought, well, I know how to sew. I know how to you know figure things out. So the tent, I decided to make a tent, but I wanted to make a tent that was minimalist. And by that I mean I wanted something that was super light, but also gave me some nice features. And I spent a bunch of time working on the tie outs. And what my stated goal was, I wanted a tent that didn't have any stitching anywhere that mattered. So like the entire canopy, no stitching. This material, the cool thing about this material is you basically can use adhesive to stick it together. And with the right adhesive, it never ever comes apart. So, a lot of people would sew, they would tape and then sew through that. And then, you have to do a seam sealing and all this stuff. I'm just going to go full send. I'm going to figure out how to build this thing so I don't need any sewing whatsoever. And the only place I had any sewing was in the tie outs. And that was a process of testing it and using like, I was literally taking like a piece of rebar through the tie out and yanking on it as hard as I could to try to, test it to failure. And so iterating on that, trying to make that tie out as strong as possible and not compromise the canopy. So it's just kind of like this cool process of figuring out, okay, well, how can I build this thing
Was this a
that's
one
as light
person
as
tent?
possible?
Because you were going
Two
with like
person,
friends. Okay, so were
yeah.
you guys sharing the carrying load, or just a 2-person tent for yourself?
That's kind of a funny question because I I always kind of insisted on having my backpack be capable of being completely solo. So that meant I was carrying the tent. That meant the things that could be shared, I tended to be more interested in carrying.
Is there a
I mean,
reason
not
for that?
100%. I just like the idea of, part of it is I wanted to be prepared to go solo. If I ever wanted to go out by myself, I wanted to make sure that I already had everything ironed out to go solo. Um, it's funny enough, I never actually ended up going solo out in Alaska. Um, there was a couple times that I was going to take some side trips, but weather would get in the way, that kind of thing. Um, so no, I like the idea of achieving something on my own. Having everything is down to just me and how I prepared for it, and that's always been something appealing to me. Is figure it out, make it work so that I can do this effectively by myself, and see what happens.
Sounds like why you might like jujitsu. You need someone else
Yeah,
to prepare, but ultimately it's on you.
yeah. I mean, I joke sometimes that the only problem with jujitsu is that I have to get other people involved. You know, I don't have a choice. So I've learned to enjoy that part of it. But yeah, no, I like this. It's on you. You know, the success, the failure, it's on you. And if you fail, okay, that's something to optimize and make better. Try to avoid that failure in the future, and you try to make it so that if you do fail, it's not going to be a catastrophic failure.
I mean, you're talking a lot about preparation. Like, it sounds like you almost spend more time preparing than doing the trip. Is that kind of how you think
Yeah,
about it?
yeah, absolutely.
Is,
Yeah,
is
I
that
mean,
like a bleed in
especially if
sweat and training kind of a mentality?
yeah, when I was coming up through the ranks, I spent basically as much time off the mat studying as I did actually on the mats. So thinking about it, preparing for it, yeah, it was that's if you want to maximize the results when your feet are being held to the fire, you got to prepare. You can't just you can't just the see red and make things work. It just doesn't. Nothing operates that way. So yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, optimizing, refining, figuring out, okay, is there a better way to do this? Whether it's jujitsu, whether it's backpacking, um, like like pretty much everything I do, I'm always looking for an opportunity to optimize whatever I'm doing. I like that process.
What are you optimizing these days in backpacking?
Yeah, everything has gotten uh pretty stable. It's like you start you, it's like anything that you optimize. You can always do too much, and it's just not worth it. So the only thing I've got some like back burner projects that I couldn't ever do because it would have required machining or capabilities that I didn't have. Now with 3D printing, I think I need to revisit some of that stuff. Like I've got a design for a thing that attaches to my bear can that turns it into like the core structure of a backpack. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to build a backpack that goes around this unconventional theory of, well, I've got my bear can anyway, and the bear can is nearly as long as my back. So let's design a backpack that incorporates that into the design. It's not so dissimilar. Like the tent that I built, um, I actually had to, in order to do what I wanted, I had to play around with building carbon fiber parts because it was the only thing that was light enough to achieve what I wanted to do. So I had to make this thing that attached to my trekking pole and then could Velcro to the top of the canopy to hold it up. So my trekking poles were my support. But the only way that was going to work without any sewing in the canopy was to attach, basically to tape Velcro onto the canopy and then have Velcro on this carbon fiber cap for my pole. And then that was, that was the, you know, I had to manufacture something. But for the stuff like the backpack, that has such a dramatic impact on your daily comfort. I wasn't willing to get into that before I could really do it correctly. And now that my backpack has pretty much worn out, I'm actually starting to get back into, okay, I need to take this design a little bit more seriously and optimize my backpack so that, for what I'm specifically doing, I think I can use that bear can as a foundation and then incorporate some of the ideas that I had on my tent and, come up with something that is optimal for me. Yeah, I don't know if it'll be optimal for anybody else, but it's an interesting idea. And it's like once I get an idea, it's like I'm I'm going to chase this thing down. I'm going to find out, what's a logical endpoint of it, and is it worth getting into?
Have you thrown
And
any
now that
ideas away, like like just going through and you're like, you know what, this is more trouble than it's worth?
yeah. I mean, there's I got into like I was designing some what amounted to like water gear. Um, and the idea was I wanted something that was super light that I could like climb through the rivers in Alaska, the rivers and streams. They're all insanely cold, and I'm bizarrely allergic to cold, so I got to be real careful about like getting cold water on me. So I was trying to make these basically waders of a sort that I could slip on that were made out of this ultralight material, had some Vibram rubber on the bottom to give me traction. And, I had some templates made and I'm doing all this stuff. And it's like, I'm going to be in the water for all of like 30 seconds at a time. I'm optimizing for a scenario that I'm adding, yeah, it's only like an extra 8 or 10 ounces of weight. But the reality is I just need to tough it out. I'm not going to run into that big of a problem for the amount of time that I'm going to be in this insanely cold water. So it was just like
What's wrong with the
I was
stuff that's out
optimizing.
there? I feel like there's a lot of, there's a lot of companies who do like camping gear, hiking gear, backpacking gear, like really high end stuff. Was it like a cost thing, or just you're like, no, I've got the itch. I'm going to do this myself, and then you kind of said, screw it,
No,
it's good enough.
yeah, I mean, building your own stuff is not cost effective. Um, so it was really more about things
No,
like
no, no. I
weight.
meant, but like buying high end gear is also not like, whether it's cost effective or not to do
True.
your own stuff. You still need the capital to buy high end
Yeah.
gear.
Yeah. And but oftentimes the high end gear wasn't. I thought I could do it better, right? So, sometimes yeah, the high end like my trekking poles, sure I could build my own, but the ones that are out there are much better. And like even the carbon fiber ones that I use that are like ultra light, um, sure they're simple. I could build that. There's no point in building it. I would learn some interesting things, and if building things just for the sake of learning something is the goal, well then sure,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that. It's going to be expensive, but it can also be very fun and rewarding. And then you have something that you can say, okay, I know how to do this. I made this on my own. I understand why it works. You build a deeper understanding of what you're interacting with by, you know, getting into nitty gritty of, okay, how do we build this? And then you can look at the existing, you can look at, maybe something commercial thing comes out that replicates what you've been doing. And you can look at the features of what you did and be like, all right, well, I guess I don't need to make my own anymore. This'll work
Yeah.
fine. So, optimize everything and don't get attached to anything. That's kind of like how I do pretty much everything everywhere in my life. It turns out.
Do you have any like horror stories or something about like something that went wrong, or any close call, or your gear failing, something that was
Yeah.
like, yeah, this didn't quite go the way I was hoping?
So my just as a quick example, because it made an impact on me. I my first trip into the Arctic, I had these ultralight carbon fiber trekking poles, and my buddy had these more conventional aluminum ones. And as we're hiking around in the Arctic, you got these things called tussocks that are basically just like grass that grows on top of itself and grows on top of itself, and then you have these big balls of grass that sometimes fall over when you walk on them. So as you're trying to cross the landscape, like there's water in between all these tussocks. So you want to walk on top of them, but these things aren't necessarily stable. So you're always just like, 1 foot placement away from potentially toppling over. So I'm crossing between like these two big tussocks, a whole bunch of water in between. and I go to step and things go wrong. And I put my hiking pole out to catch myself and it snaps. And I'm like, I'm like, like 4 days into a 10-day trip. I'm like, wow, this really sucks. Because, yes, you can hike without trekking poles. It's just nowhere near as efficient. And, when you're walking through, you know, no trails, hiking poles become more important. So that was like that changed how I look at the hiking poles. So what I ended up doing was part of my part of my tent design. I utilized a third pole. So I started hiking with 3 hiking poles. And because of my tent design, it actually turned out that having 2 hiking poles to hold it up and then a third hiking pole to hold open other parts of the canopy, it was actually a super. It made it so that my enjoyment in the field was much greater, and it also gave me redundancy on my hiking poles. So, having my equipment fail also, opened up thinking about, okay, well, how can I turn compensating for this failure into something that makes me more comfortable, despite, maybe sure, it's a little bit more weight, but if it brings me more capability, like I said, I had the 3 trekking poles. Okay, well, I guess I could make a tripod out of this. So I threw together some carbon fiber, like really rudimentary, this like, ounce and a half, effectively tripod head that I could stick my hiking poles into it, put the camera on top of it, and now I've got a tripod for like no extra weight. My first trip out, I took a conventional tripod, and that was awful, really heavy. I didn't like it at all. So then, making what amounted to an ultralight tripod that depended on having those 3 poles that I wanted to have for redundancy and also to improve what I could do with my tent, it actually worked out really well.
But if one of those
So,
breaks, now you've lost your tent and your tripod, no?
well, no, I've only lost convenience. And, a bipod for a camera is almost as good as a tripod. So it's like there's ways to compensate for one of those poles breaking. That's not going to make my trip harder. If I had 2 poles break, well, now I'm going to have to like be using sticks, which are kind of hard to come by in the Arctic. So, 2 sticks breaking, I'd have to I'd have to be creative with tie outs with rocks and things like that. So it's like there's ways around it. There's always things where you need a certain amount of redundancy in what's going on. Especially when it's your life or significant comfort on the line. You have to have redundancies. You have to have a plan for what happens when this breaks. Um, sometimes, like in the case of the tent, one of the questions is, okay, what happens if I get a hole in it? A bear chew through it or, whatever, who knows? Do I have enough repair materials with me to fix the problem? Or, like I would have like a really small sewing kit that I took with me in case something broke. But the kinds of tools that I brought with me always came down to, okay, what is the likelihood of something failing? What are the consequences of it failing? And what can I do to fix the situation if it does fail? And what are my ultimate, things have really all gone wrong? Do I have the capability to get rescued in some way? So things like taking a sat phone. That was always something that, when we would go out, that would be one of the things that, could we make it without the sat phone? Most of the time, yes. But there are scenarios where having a sat phone and, calling for an expensive rescue, you don't have any choice. You break a leg in the field and nobody's going to be there for months. You need to get rescued, whether you like it or not. So being prepared for that is part of the planning.
I mean, have you ever needed the sat phone?
No,
Okay.
I think the most significant thing I ever used a sat phone was for my wife and I were in the process of buying a house, and she needed to talk to me about, what offer to make. That's like the most serious thing that ever happened on the sat phone.
Okay. Well, I mean that, knock on wood, that's like a pretty good situation to be in. You took the tripod, you made the tripod for, the tracking. Like, was the photography stuff that you were doing like critical to the trip for you, or was it a side thing, or like how did you view photography for yourself? Having it be not only part of your profession but also part of your hobby.
Yeah. So the it's kind of weird because when I first started backpacking, my idea was that I wanted to eventually create a book. So I was taking voice notes. I had like this little tiny USB voice recorder that I would use to take notes with. Um, and my idea was that I was going to turn my experiences in Alaska into a book. Both describing the things that happened as well as having high quality photography. And it's kind of funny because over time, the smaller cameras, while I was getting some amazing photos, using really high quality lenses, high quality camera, all that stuff, I was getting amazing photos, but it was always such a hassle to get out of my bag. I had like everything in a top pack, and I could like unzip and pull stuff out, but it was still a lot of work. And then my buddy with like this just little tiny digital camera, he was pulling up, there's a picture of a flower. Oh, there's a picture of an animal. And, it takes me 30 seconds to even start. I was like, it's great to have excellent tools. It produces excellent results, but having any results is better. So I actually ended up gravitating towards a reasonably high quality, smaller digital camera that, still has good resolution, has good zoom, and I kind of converted over to using that for most of my stuff with the full understanding that, yeah, there's going to be things that I won't be able to capture in the field. Um, but I'll be able to use it so much more that I think it'll end up compensating.
Did you miss it? Like, did you miss the film cameras, or were you just like, no, the convenience is worth it?
I never did anything with film cameras. I did not take any photography seriously until digital cameras came out back in the Canon. Like, I think the first one that we bought was D60. There was like the first Canon was a D30, and then there was a D60, and we got on board with the D60 for my wife and I for portrait photography. And then I started really getting into the photography angle, and this I she was always doing people, and I was always doing objects or fine art style stuff. Um, so we didn't take
What is
any
it
of that
about
seriously
portrait
until it was easy.
photography that did it for you?
Everything like, so my wife was the main one that wanted to, well, it's kind of funny. So it started out, she just wanted to take pictures of her kids. Like, mom with a camera, MWAC. But she wanted to take better photos. And, then people were like, "Oh wow, I really like your photos." And so she started taking it more seriously. So we actually did seminars with like world famous portrait photographers. And I was interested in learning it, but she ended up doing it as a business. And I learned all the portrait photography, partly just to learn more about photography in general. And then I gravitated away from it. I had the formal training, classical formal training for portrait photography, but I tended more towards things that weren't portraits. We did like, her business, we ended up doing like school photos. So I would take all the girls, she'd take all the guys, and we'd run them through that, high volume stuff, but still trying to do it to a high quality portrait standard. Tricky. But that was fun. I even ended up writing my own software for that, in order to keep track of the students in the photos. I made stuff to generate the barcodes. I had these scripts written for Photoshop that would build the barcodes and print them out on the 3x5 cards, and made the software for scanning the barcode, getting the photos from the camera, getting which one is associated with which student. So I built all that stuff from scratch, which was kind of like my introduction to directly interacting with the camera through an SDK, which then for my regular software business that I'm doing now is actually a cornerstone of what we do. So, my wife getting into digital photography and us learning portraiture ended up turning into something that primed me for all the stuff that I'm doing now.
You did all that stuff in C#?
Uh, The original stuff started out in C++. It did end up getting converted to C#.
Interesting.
So it was
So you built the
when I was
SDK
doing the
in C++?
project. Yeah. So it was like in that kind of like in between time. When
Got it.
I was transitioning between, I had a lot of existing code that was in C++, but I was also building out the C# stuff. So like if I wanted to get something done quickly, I'd do it in C++. If I was doing something with the future in mind, that was all C#. So
Did you try
there was
reselling
quite
any
a
of
while.
that? Like, student mapping software? No, that was just
No.
your own personal stuff.
Yeah. No, I probably could have, but I didn't, I'm very focused on what I'm trying to make money off of. Like my main software business, that's what I'm making money off of. I don't want to make money off of jujitsu. I don't want to put my time into anything else of like, I don't want to be like, get into woodworking for making stuff for people. I don't want to do anything that distracts me from, my main source of income. So like the photography stuff, that was always her business. So my goal was to facilitate her business. And, while the software easily could have sold it, but it would have required more effort than I wanted to put into it. It would have required proper marketing, getting, maybe doing trade shows, all that kind of garbage I didn't want to get into. It's just like, I will never own a jujitsu school because I don't want to do all those things that aren't teaching it.
That's fair.
So
I get that.
So it always comes back down to, I want to have one thing that I use for my income. Everything else I'm doing for enjoyment.
That's fair. I wish I had the ability to take a similar tact, but for the most part, I have so many things that I like doing, and some of them pay too. So I just, I do them, and I get enjoyment out of the majority of things that I do, and also get paid for not all of them, but most of them.
Yeah, and that's cool. It's just as soon as I start having to, it's like if I have to think about something, I'm going to take it out to its logical conclusion. So it's. Have you ever used an AI and you're like, okay, I want to do this, and it comes up with this huge plan to turn into some big commercial monstrosity, and you're like, I'm just trying to solve one little problem. And you're giving me like all these, cloud-based solutions and saying, what the scalability is going to be for worldwide distribution. It's like, take a step back. That's not what I'm trying to do, But when I'm presented with something like, let's say something that's could potentially make money, as soon as that is on the table, well, now I have to take that part seriously too, because I don't want to just go part way. I want to, if I'm going to engage in it, I want to be fully immersed in it and do it to the best of my ability. So I don't want to have my attention divided. So it's probably why I don't have like a ton of hobbies. There's been a lot of things that I've done. I've done skydiving, scuba diving, the backpacking series. I've done photography on the side. There's been some things that I've done that I was able to make a little bit of money on.
You
But
jumped also?
ultimately,
How many skydives did you get before you kind of said no more?
I didn't even technically get my Class A license. I think I had like 20. I had like 20 some jumps. I went to DeLand in Florida. They had a thing for
I've jumped there.
Their advanced free fall thing where you basically your first jump is with two instructors on either side, and then they peel off and you're pulling your own chute. So you're like you're cleared to jump after I think it was 7 jumps. Cleared to jump solo. So my brother and I did that, and that was awesome. And it was super appealing to me because like, all right, yeah, there's no tandem jump. This is on you. And
skydiving's
the
an
very first thing you
expensive
do.
hobby.
Yeah. And I did not have the money for it then. The only reason I did was because my brother offered to pay for it. I'm like, all right, cool. And then he got into the skydiving really seriously.
Yeah, I got about just shy of 900. I got about 878 skydives
Nice.
or so, and
Yeah.
I had to put it all down a few years ago. The more I got into jiu-jitsu, because it was just limited time, limited money, limited focus, and it's also why I didn't go into coaching skydiving. Like I coached a couple people and then realized this is not how I don't want to make money doing this. I want this to be a hobby and be a passion. And I couldn't
Yeah,
find the
see,
balance
you
there.
get it.
Yeah. But I do that in jujitsu, right? I love teaching, and so I stick with that. And yeah, it pays a little bit, but I do it because I love it. But I could not find the balance with skydiving, and so I had to back out and said, no, it's too many things to do at once.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Skydiving, scuba diving, all these different things are a lot of fun to do. But there's just only so much time in the day, and if you're oriented towards wanting to be an expert at things, you have to cut down on what you focus on. So when I got serious about jujitsu, I actually ended up playing a lot less video games. Like my late 20s, early 30s, getting on playing Halo after everybody went to bed, that was like my standard thing. And it was a lot of fun. It wasn't interfering with my work, it wasn't interfering with my family, and it was fun. But when I started doing jujitsu, it's like, all right, well, if I want to study at night, I'm going to have to give some things up. When I started studying jujitsu stuff, it's like if my girls were going to a dance recital, well, more practice than recitals, but I'd have Jiu-Jitsu University with me and reading that book and studying the techniques in it. I had a subscription to MG in Action, and I was looking at that like almost every single night, studying stuff. So, if you want to be truly good at something, it takes a lot of time. So it's like, these people that are like really, really good at lots of things, I really admire them. It's like, yeah, I would love to be good at, on the guitar. I don't have the time for it. I really enjoy it. But I don't have time to get really, really good. So I have to, kind of pick my battles, especially when things like software, when you're a solo software developer, there's always something to do. There's always something that you could be working on. So you're always behind the 8 ball. So, most like evenings, I will be writing software. Yeah. And different, like the last year, I had a period of about, I don't know, like 8 months where I was working 14 hours a day, every single day, because we had some stuff that we just absolutely had to get out in order to meet the market demands. And that sucked, but, had to do it. Didn't have any choice.
There's only so many hours in a day, and putting food on the table and a roof over your head is usually, thing one before you can go do jujitsu sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any piece of advice that you wish everyone knew? Like you've got all these hobbies and all this life experience. Is there anything you wish everyone knew?
Life experience. In a lot of ways, I think we've really kind of covered it, because you have to prioritize things, and you have to assign a certain amount of value to the things that you're doing. And what's the cost and benefit? I mean, it sounds a little bit sterile, but realistically, you have to do that. You have to decide, what are these different things worth, and what are the benefits that I'm going to get out of it? Am I going to, like jujitsu, I knew getting into it, it was something that I could do for the rest of my life, because I saw people that were, 70, 80 years old, black belts that were still doing jujitsu and teaching, and it's like, well, I can do that. So that would, I tried to take that kind of stuff seriously. And anytime something, and I still explore new things. It's good to try things out, and it's good to see if it's something that, maybe this is going to be a core part of what I do. But if it's not, that's okay too. You have to be responsive to what you yourself and those around you can handle. And as long as you're honest about it, that's all going to work out. If somebody walks in and says they're going to be a world champion at jiu-jitsu, it's like, all right, cool. Here's what you got to do. If you're willing to do that, great. That's let's see how close you can get to that. Maybe you can achieve that goal. But if they're not willing, if what the stated goals don't match with the actual output, then you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to make adjustments to what your goals are. So, being honest about what you put in and what you get out is like probably the most important thing, not just in jiu-jitsu, but everything. Are you going to optimize a process? Cool. Is it worth it? If you spend way too much time on that and you miss a window, then it's not worth optimizing. It's better to have something that actually works.
I don't think most people understand how selfish someone needs to be in order to be really, really great at something. Like that, I think is like a lesson that the average person doesn't understand. I think like there's this overestimation of people's own like competence and ability to gain knowledge quickly or gain skills quickly. But to be really great, like you can be good at something like passively, but to be great, you have to be selfish. And I don't think that's a thing people understand.
No, it's hard to divide your attention and to be excellent at two things at once. It's like when I had one competition that I went to where I was competing and coaching at the same time. I will never do that again, because getting my students ready for competition and getting myself ready for competition, it's just, you're not going to be able to do both extremely well, or at least I certainly can. I found out that, my performance was going to end up suffering because I had to pay attention to my students. And, if it's me or 20 people that are depending on me, I'm going to pick the 20 people that are depending on me. If it was just me, I'd have to be like, all right, somebody else is going to need to coach you guys, because, the process of, like you said, being selfish, it demands a lot of you. If you want really to have true excellence at something, you do have to be selfish. You have to be ruthless with your time. And if that's worth it to you, cool. If you can't do that, well, then you better adjust your goals.
There's also something about coaching that I feel like people don't think about when it comes to, like, I don't compete, so I'm not really, it's just not something that interests me. I haven't done it since college wrestling. But I noticed that when I'm coaching, like, it's a fair amount of effort to keep a fairly consistent emotional level. And if you are competing yourself, then that makes it even more complicated because you're managing your own emotions. And then the result of your competition, you have to manage those emotions, whether they're positive or negative, and then reset level wise to go be consistent with your emotions, to be able to think straight and coach people and meet them where they're at. And that's a lot of effort that it's really difficult to do if you're competing at the same time.
Uh, I'm going to push back on that just a little bit.
Please do.
So for me, when I'm competing, I tried harnessing, like some people, want to get amped up before competing, or they'll be like, visualizing just tearing through people, you know, and anytime that I try to do anything other than just go in and do my plan, or think about, how's anybody else, how are students competing or anything like that. When I go in and compete, I basically, the only thing on my mind is take down, control, submit. That's it. Nothing else matters. There's no emotion associated with it. When I'm coaching, it's a very mechanical, okay, this is where we're at, this is where we need to be. And I don't like the emotional aspect doesn't like come into it at all. If they win or lose, that was mostly, I'm there as an assistant when I'm coaching. I'm not a puppet master. All of the things where their success or failure, it comes from the stuff that they did before that. I'm just there to analyze the situation, maybe call out some things that the other person's doing, make sure they're aware of what their goals are. They're not getting too focused on one thing. And for me, that is a very non-emotional thing. So for me personally, there's not a lot of managing that, because it's just another problem to solve. It's another thing to analyze, and I do my best work when there's no like emotional attachment involved, other than what are the
I think
goals,
you're the
how do we achieve the
exception, not
goals.
the rule.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely think so.
Because I tried to do something very similar, not be like emotionless or anything, but just to try to like keep a very stable like lower bound and upper bound. But for example, like when my wife competes, like I get very into it. Like even when I'm like coaching and whatever, like I get very into it. And so then to go coach somebody else immediately after that, It's like I have to bring myself down to a sane level, otherwise I'm going to get burnt out from just the emotional highs and lows.
Yeah, no, I actually have to force myself to insert at least a little bit of emotion into it, but only after the match is done. And it's like, when somebody wins, it's like, all right, that was awesome. You did it. You did a great job. I'm really happy for you. All that hard work paid off. You can't just be a robot on things like that, because that's just not, it's not conducive to a good environment.
Yeah.
So even though it's not necessarily my first reaction, my natural reaction, and maybe this is just the big introvert in me, but my natural reaction is, here's the job to do. Let's get it done. Move on to the next thing. But when we're dealing with coaching, you have to put that human element into it. You have to pay attention to how people feel about it. So you can't just be this effectively robot. Nobody wants that. And it's not helpful to people. So you have to know what people need and help them with where they're at, which is that's actually hard for me, is to have that kind of, being able to bring that in. But it's also really important if you want to help people the most.
When I see somebody who's like getting ready for their first competition ever, like a white belt, and they're like, okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. And you're like, hey, the only thing I want you to do is breathe. And they're like, no, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to arm bar. I'm going to take down. And you're like, whoa, just breathe. Just breathe. Right. You do that. And then you go over to the purple belt or brown belt. And they're like, okay, I'm going to go in. I'm going to go for a single leg. And you're like, okay, cool. Let's look at their posture. Let's look at the range that you have to have when you're coaching people, I feel like, is why that particular thing is a bit challenging sometimes if you're going to try to do it yourself, because you can be cold and mechanical about yourself if you've got the experience with it, but you have to have range, because we've got 400 or 500 students at my gym, and when there's a tournament in Berlin, we end up coaching 50-60 matches per coach or something like that. And so you can go a lot of ups and downs, and you got to kind of maintain it, yell the right way with not with your throat. Otherwise you've got no voice by 9 a.m. So I think that particular set of skills is really hard to do if you're competing and coaching at the same time, because you have to manage your own emotions and then range through into dealing with other folks in healthy ways.
Yeah, no, that definitely, that's like you said, that is the normal way of how everybody has to deal with it when coaching is a separate skill, an entirely separate skill from jujitsu. And it's tough to do that, because you have to, well, like you said, when you're competing for yourself, you have to be selfish. When you're helping somebody else compete, now it's all about them. It's all about how do you help them achieve their goals. You are an assistant, and hopefully a very competent assistant.
Yeah, I agree. What are you excited for in the future? Like, what are you looking forward to these days?
The biggest thing that I'm looking forward to is getting out and doing more seminars. I mean, I like going to the camps and teaching at the camps. A lot of fun. But I'm trying to get more people on the books for, like, some of the stuff I've done. I've gone to a few different schools. They brought me in to teach and do seminars, private lessons, that kind of stuff. And I'm looking forward to visiting more parts of the country and the world. So, I've always wanted to be one of these people that other, like, black belts go to, right? I want to be kind of like that next level black belt that, people are looking to me for advice, not because I'm trying to, it's more a proof of my own ability more than, I'm not like looking for people to say how wonderful I am. I'll feel like I've made it to that level of excellence in teaching when I've got other people that are already experts are looking for my input. And that's a work in progress always. But part of,
is that what you're writing about these days?
No, I actually, all of my writing is focused on, like, white belts and blue belts. I'm because I'm there's so many people out there that are saying how to do jujitsu, giving techniques, giving, oh, here's a cool technique, or here's something you may not have seen before. And like every black belt has some little thing in their back pocket that, that they've worked extra hard on, and they have this cool technique. Anybody can do that. What there isn't a lot of out there is how to think about jujitsu. What are we really trying to accomplish? Like, when we're doing a submission, what are the mechanics that are actually going on? What actually matters in, like, every choke, all the abstractions of jujitsu and how to think about it. That's what I'm focused on. And that's what I kind of like hope to spread out to the wider community, is how do we think about jujitsu and come up with these rules and abstractions that facilitate everybody from a white belt up to black belt. Because I think how to think about jujitsu is an underdeveloped area of jujitsu. It's so
I would
focused on
agree with that.
technique. It's so focused on sequencing moves, and okay, if this thing fails, then we go to this. But there's so little context, and things like the ego approach attempt to solve some of that. But I want, just like in software, where I'm looking for abstractions, I'm looking for what are the rules of what I'm trying to do that facilitate not only solving this problem, but solving a larger class of problems. And I want that in jujitsu. I want to take, effectively my skills in software and abstracting things and looking for deeper rules and apply that to jujitsu and spread that around. I want to get out to more schools. I want to get out to more areas of the country, because like my standard thing is, I'm not, all it takes to bring me out to someplace is give me a long weekend, give me a plane ticket, someplace to sleep, and I'll go teach. You want me to teach for 8 hours? I'll do that. I've got more than enough jujitsu stamina to do whatever level of teaching they want. And I go out there and I want to spread how to think about jujitsu. Obviously there's going to be techniques, but it's really more about how do you think about jujitsu and how do you apply that thinking to these techniques.
So how does
that's what I'm
somebody
looking
get in
forward to.
touch with you? If somebody wants to bring you out, how do they get in touch with you?
Pretty easy to find online. Pretty much if you search for Simple BJJ, I'm the main thing you're going to find. Find me on Facebook, Instagram. I've got my website, but if somebody's trying to reach out to get a hold of me directly, either Instagram or Facebook or X, on the normal platforms, just send me a message. The time to, I usually schedule about a couple months out in advance. So like right now, I'm scheduling 2 months from now and 3 months from now to go out to places. And if you've got students that could really benefit from a private lesson from somebody that thinks the way that I think, let's do that for free. If I go out someplace, I want to see what the local area is like. Going to North Carolina to like the Asheville area, there's cool craft beers and all sorts of cool art.
You were
and
out at
stuff like
open
that.
source?
I didn't actually visit open source. I actually went to Josh's place, and also went to Speakeasy Jiu-Jitsu right in Asheville. I haven't gotten out to open source yet, hoping to. But I went to Alabama, and one of the things that I went to see there was the National Space Center, which was
nice.
really cool to see these old Atlas V rockets. So like if you're someplace that has like really cool nature or cool technology or anything like that, I'm pretty interested in visiting and doing as much jujitsu as anybody can possibly handle, and also hang out and do other cool things too. And
Nice.
because jujitsu is not my business, I want to make it basically inexpensive for people to do that, and to have somebody that is super passionate about jujitsu and takes teaching that stuff very seriously.
Awesome. So I'm going to link to all that stuff in the show notes, Simple BJJ everywhere. And I really appreciate your time today, Paul. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was really cool, and I'll try to implement some of those AI tips that you gave me.
Yep. Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about backpacking, photography, programming, or writing for Jiu-Jitsu, feel free to reach out to Paul. If you find yourself near Oklahoma City, find Paul at Redline BJJ for a role. If you like Paul's view on Jiu-Jitsu or want to bring him in for a seminar, you can find his contact information and websites in the show notes, or just go to simplebjj.com. And as always, thank you for your time and attention.